Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today I want to talk about training scars for a moment. That is the idea that there are certain tasks or procedures that you have to practice, and if you don't practice them just exactly right, there will be really catastrophic consequences, whether it's anything as banal as getting disqualified from a competitive shooting event to as serious as getting kilt on the streets in a gunfight. This is a subject that kind of came up, it kind of came to light with Finnish brutality this year, specifically with a number of people commenting on the rule that was implemented for this year's match that you have to retain empty magazines. Now, for what it's worth, that rule was instituted to minimize the time interval for stage reset between shooters, because if you don't have to go track down everybody's empty magazines, everything just runs that much more quickly. So it really made sense from a logistical perspective for that rule to be in place for the match. But I saw a number of people commenting that retaining empty magazines is a negative thing to train. You don't want to practice that. You don't want to ingrain that habit in yourself, or else you run the risk of basically being, well, essentially being that California Highway Patrol officer that we probably all heard of. And I don't know if this story is true or just apocryphal, but the idea of a highway patrolman who was found dead after a gunfight with his pockets full of empty spent brass. The point being, he did all of his training the same way in a shooting range where he was keeping empty brass. Instead of letting it hit the floor, he would empty the revolver into his hands and then put the empty brass in the pocket. And when he actually got into a real gunfight, he spent his time trying to properly deal with brass instead of returning fire or getting reloading or getting behind cover, which he should have been doing. So the concept that I see from some people, which I think is a serious mistake, is that if you have to figure out the ideal methodology for every task that you're practicing, and you have to make sure that you practice it that way every time, lest you get yourself into a habit that will have problems at some point down the road. And I think there's a huge glaring problem with that, which is you can't necessarily predict exactly what behavior is going to be best suited to any given situation that might hypothetically happen in the future. For example, if you're practicing shooting with a mind towards preparing yourself for a military engagement or a civilian self-defense engagement, there are lots of things that you cannot do in your practice environment that would be good habits in the real environment that you're trying to prepare for. Things like just if you're at a public shooting range, you can't be swinging the gun around uprange, which is something that you very possibly might need to do in a real situation. So where I think we get the real problem is the concept of training as simply building a pre-constructed habitual response to fulfill a specific task. How do I draw the pistol? Well, I always draw the pistol by going through A, B, C, D, E, F specific motions. And I want to ingrain that to the point that I don't even think about it, it just happens automatically. Or any other thing. Reloading, for example. What do you do with your empty magazines? Well, I always want to drop them on the ground because that's the most efficient, effective thing to do with them, and they're empty, so I don't need them. The problem I see, of course, is that that may prepare you for one very specific set of conditions, but it won't prepare you for anything else. So on the one hand, if you're practicing for a specific competitive environment or something that has a very rigorous set of rules, and that's all that you're trying to prepare for, then absolutely. That sort of rigorous training, rigorous identical training is, in fact, your best option. But if you want to have a well-rounded skill set and be able to respond to a variety of things, I think what you actually need to do is train yourself to be able to have a mental focus on both the big picture of what's going on, as well as understanding, recognizing, or being conscious of what you're doing with those individual tasks that you're trying to do at the same time. So in this case, if we're thinking a gunfight, you need to be able to keep a situational awareness of what's going on, but also recognize what you're doing when you're reloading. Like to notice that, hey, I'm getting shot at, I should just dump these revolver cases on the ground because I don't care about them, instead of holding onto them and putting them in my pocket. And I think the way that you do that is by practicing a variety of different skills in a variety of different conditions, to the point that you're building an ability to work with the tools at hand without straitjacketing yourself into a specific set of motions. So I guess the point that I'm getting at here is I think training scars, we typically hear about training scars as, oh, like you shoot USPSA, so you're going to develop some bad habits like standing stock upright in the open to reload a pistol when you ought to be reloading it from behind cover, like the IDPA guys do. And thus you shouldn't shoot USPSA because it will develop these detrimental habits. In reality, I think the actual answer is training scars come from not having enough practice, not from having too much practice, regardless of whether that is tactical training, competition shooting, or to some extent even just plinking out at the shooting range. That's not going to help you as much as something that's perhaps a little more task-focused and and done with a specific intent, but it does build some skills. So when people say training scars, to me that comes from that middle ground of I've done something enough that I have a rote method of doing a specific thing. A good example would be muzzle discipline. So if you only ever shoot, let's say, USPSA or IDPA or IPSC, your muzzle discipline is going to be downrange at all times. And you're probably going to get pretty good at maintaining it because you're going to be practicing things like 179 degree, 180 trap targets. If you then transition yourself into, let's say, a 360 degree simunitions tactical training environment, well, there your safety zone is going to generally be vertically up and down, and you don't want to be holding the gun horizontally all the time because you stand a much greater chance of sweeping someone that's you're not intending to shoot. But again, you go the reverse. If you spend all your time training with a vertical safe position and then you go out onto a two-gun or a USPSA stage, you're going to be in big trouble because you're going to, if you've got that mechanistically ingrained in your head, you're going to come back to here, and the moment you go a little bit back, you've broken the 180 and you're disqualified. In a real actual shooting situation, whether civilian or military, who knows what the safe direction is? Are you in a crowd of people that you don't want to flag? Are you in the middle of nowhere? It could be the safe direction is don't point it at that building, but anything else is okay. Or it could be only pointed at that building, nothing else is okay. You don't know. And so if you want to build a diverse sort of a universal skill set, what you need to do is practice enough that you can do complete the big picture objective, whether that is like find and engage targets, while also maintaining an awareness of what you're doing on the small stuff. Where is my muzzle? I need to be aware of, while I'm persecuting this target array, where am I keeping my muzzle if I'm not shooting? And to me, in my experience, that comes from having a wide variety of experience. And if you try to narrow it down and only practice the optimal, the best thing, inevitably you will find yourself in a situation where that's not the best thing, and now you actually do have a training scar. If you get out there and practice more and shoot more competition especially, you're going to build an ability to adapt to different dynamic circumstances, and that's what I've seen in the real world, which granted for me is not a military world, it is a competition world, but the people who perform the best with unexpected tasks and diverse new environments are the people who have practiced the most in the widest variety of different environments. So when I hear people suggesting that you shouldn't shoot discipline A, B, C, whatever, because of the training scars that will build, I think that's exactly the opposite. You want to build the best set of skills, you need to be practicing everything from positional bullseye shooting through dynamic sports like USPSA or two-gun. So anyway, let me know what you think. This is something that, as I said at the beginning, kind of came up when I saw people discussing the magazine retention rule at Finished Brutality this year. Frankly, that's another really good example of it. In fact, to ramble on for another moment here, I remember a story, and at this point I don't know if it was a true story or apocryphal, but from Hurricane Katrina, with a guy who was doing private security with a pistol and had a basic loadout of, I think, like 3 magazines, but he's wading through 3-foot deep water. and actually does get into a shooting engagement and realizes, and I don't know how quickly he realized this, but it's a perfect example of having to respond to dynamic circumstances. He realized, if I drop this empty magazine, that's the most efficient thing for me to do right now. There's no ammo in it. I don't need it. It's of no use to me. Drop it. Well, it goes bloop into 3 feet of muddy water that he's wading through, and he will never find it again. And if he needs to reload that magazine to use again later because he's in the middle of a huge natural disaster emergency situation, well, he can't. He actually needs to retain those empty magazines if he has to use them so that they can be reloaded and reused later. The exact opposite of what you would expect in most shooting situation training. Like, yeah, you need to take the time to keep that magazine because it may become extremely important to you later. And people who have, to my mind, sufficient and widely varied enough practice and habits can respond to that environment and say, okay, I'm on a square range doing training, trying to get the best splits. I'm just going to drop my magazines. Or today, I'm at finished brutality where I have to maintain control of my empty magazines. Or tomorrow, I'm in the middle of a hurricane zone, and if I drop the mag, it's gone forever, so I need to keep it. Anyway, those are my thoughts on it. What do you think? Am I totally off base here? I'd be interested in a military thought on this, because while I do have extensive experience in different competition environments, I don't have it from a military perspective. So let me know down in the comments. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching.